What? Okay, great. Hi everybody. So my name is Jeffrey. We're back for another econ Q&A session. We're going to walk through some commonly asked micro and macroeconomics questions, go over the answer choices, find the right answer, explain why it's the right answer, and then look over a previous tutor's explanation and solution to the answer to make sure that they got it correct as well. So let's jump right into it. Oh, and it looks like my screen is not being shared. Give me 1 second, guys. Here we go. And we're back. Okay, so let's do this first question. So the first question says, which of the following is a characteristic of monopolistic competition? 1, standardized products. 2, relative easy entry. 3, a relatively small number of firms. Or 4, the absence of non-price competition. So looking at this list, we know that we're dealing with a question about one of the main types of market structures, right? We have perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. Monopolistic competition is different from the other two in its situation in an order from least competitive to most competitive. So monopolistic competition is the most competitive market next to perfect competition, right? And it's what we see a lot of markets will look like in the real world today. It's characterized by several key traits. So, for example, perfect competition assumes a large number of identical firms selling identical products. In monopolistic competition, we say there's still a large number of firms, but they sell slightly differentiated products. So there's close substitutes, but not exact substitutes, right? And so there's still a lot of firms though, which means it's still a fairly competitive market. Another thing that characteristic that we tie to monopolistic competition goes to the monopolistic part. Why do we say it's monopolistic? And that's because of that product differentiation. And we still keep the competitive part of it by saying, unlike in oligopolies and in monopolies, where there's high barriers to entries and only a few number of firms, there's very low barriers to entries in a monopolistically competitive market. And so firms can enter and exit the market as they please. And so these are some of the defining characteristics of monopolistic competition that we want to look for. So keeping those things in mind, we can take a look at the answer choices provided, and we see that answer choice number 2 seems to fit one of the criteria for our definition for monopolistic competition fairly well. Relatively easy entry into the market. So comparing that to the rest of the answer choices, number 1 says standardized product, but we know that monopolistic competition has differentiated products. 3 says a relatively small number of firms. We know that monopolistic competition has a large number of firms. And 4, the absence of non-price competition. We know that because there's product differentiation, that monopolistic competition lends itself to a lot of non-price competition. And so number 2 is going to be the best answer here. Let's take a look at what the previous tutor said. This previous tutor also said 2, relatively easy entry. And they said a monopolistically competitive market is characterized by the existence of a large number of small firms producing and supplying differentiated goods in the market that cannot be perfectly substituted for each other. There is a large number of buyers, and entry and exit into the market are unhindered from barriers. Firms engage in non-price competition in which they strive to differentiate their good from the lot available to have their unique consumer base that substantiates their bargaining power. Even though some sellers have a small degree of control over the price they charge for their consumers for their products, relatively easy of entry dissolves all long-run profit opportunities. So for the most part, we can say that's largely right. You mark that as correct. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Next question says, how would the following changes in price affect total revenue? That is, would total revenue increase, decline, or remain unchanged? And so we have 5 different scenarios here, and so let's take a look at each of those scenarios. So first scenario A says price falls and demand is inelastic. So what we know for these types of problems is that we're looking to really tie in our understanding of the total revenue equation, which is price times quantity, with what happens on demand curves that are either elastic or inelastic. So for a demand curve where price falls and demand is inelastic, we know that a fall in price is definitely going to drive up quantity demanded. But because demand is inelastic, we know that the price fall will be greater than the quantity increase. We know this because this is given to us in the equation for sorry, my mouse is not working very well. Let me try this one more time. There we go. Okay. Let's go to this. Okay. So we know elasticity. One moment. So we know elasticity is given by the equation percentage change in quantity divided by percentage change in price, right? It's a ratio. And we define elasticity as when elasticity is less than 1, we have an inelastic demand. When it's greater than 1, we have elastic demand. And when it's equal to 1, we have unitary elasticity. And so when you have inelastic demand, we know that percentage changes in, elasticity is less than 1, which implies to us that percentage changes in, and it's back to being all screwed up. One moment while I try to figure out this issue. Try this again. Nope. All wait for this to load. So if price falls, that means for A, the fall in price is going to be, the percentage fall in price will be greater than the percentage fall in quantity demanded. And so, yeah, this is just not going to work. So we're just not going to do this today. Okay. So for this one, total revenue would decline. right? The price fall is not offset by a correspondingly high increase in quantity demanded, so total revenue will fall. So for A, we think that the revenue will go down. And we can take a look at the previous year's answer, and they said for number 1, in elastic demand case, the price of commodity will be decreasing and quantity demand increases by a narrow level. This is going to decrease the revenue of the company. That's true. B says price rises and demand is elastic, so we know that a price rise causes a fall in quantity demanded, and we know that if demand is elastic, then the fall in quantity demanded is going to be greater than the rise in price. And so, in that sense, the total revenue will also go down for part B. So for part B, they say here there's an opposite reaction for a price is elastic demand, and now the price increases, the quantity demanded will be increased, but the revenue of the company will decrease. That's true. C says price rises and demand is inelastic. So if price rises, we again know that quantity demanded will fall, but we also know that because demand is inelastic, the fall in demand will not be as great as the price increase. And so putting those two factors together, we'll take that the total revenue will increase there as well. For D, we can check 3. When the price is raised, the quantity demand will decrease, but revenue will increase. That's true. That's what we said. For D, price falls and demand is elastic. If price falls, we know that quantity demand will go up, and we know that because demand is elastic, the percentage increase in quantity demand will be greater than the percentage decrease in price. So the increase in demand offsets the decrease in revenue, and therefore total revenue is going to go up. So for 4, in this case, price will fall and the quantity will increase. This means the percentage change in price is greater than the percentage change in quantity. They got this flipped. The percentage change in quantity is greater than the percentage change in price. Now the revenue will be increased. And finally, E, price falls and demand is of unit elasticity. If demand is of unit elasticity, then the percentage change in price will be exactly offset by the same percentage change in quantity, so there will be no change to revenue. And so if the elasticity is unitary, the price and quantity will increase in the same manner. If price falls, the same results in quantity demanded, so the revenue will be the same. Okay, so we got the same answers as the tutor, same outcomes. Let's take a look at this first part. Price elasticity of demand measures the percentage change in quantity demanded due to the percentage change in quantity demanded. Price elasticity of demand expressed in the term of price and quantity demanded. Price elasticity of demand helps managers to determine the total revenue that will be increased or decreased. Some of the companies that cut their prices due to reasons is that to increase their total revenue and also maximizing profit. Now, total revenue means that price is multiplied by the quantity of product, not the price of commodity. Increase the quantity of commodity will be an opposite effect. Now let's discuss the following. Okay, so I think we're going to mark the solution as incorrect even though the outcomes are the same. Some of the reasoning is bad, and also just grammatically, some of it doesn't make sense, and it requires students to do a lot of guesswork. So we're going to rewrite the entire question. Sorry, the entire solution. So total revenue is given by TR is equal to P times Q. Elasticity of demand is given by ED is equal to percentage change in P. In Q, it's Q. Divided by percentage change in P. When elasticity is said to be demand is said to be inelastic if ED is less than 1, elastic if ED is greater 1, and unit elastic if ED is equal to 1. For question A, price falls and demand is inelastic. We know that ED is less than 1. Therefore, any change in quantity, any change in price leads to a disproportionately smaller change in quantity demanded. If price falls, quantity demanded goes up by a smaller percentage. So the price effect dominates and leads to a fall in total revenue. For B, price rises and demand is elastic. We know that ED is greater than 1, therefore any change in price leads to a disproportionately larger change in quantity demanded. If price rises, quantity demanded decreases by an even larger percentage, so the quantity effect dominates and leads to a fall in total revenue. C says price rises and demand is inelastic. We know that ED is less than 1 if price rises, quantity demanded decreases by a smaller percentage, so the price effect dominates and leads to an increase in total revenue. D says price falls and demand is elastic. We know that ED greater than 1, if price falls, quantity demanded increases by a larger percentage, so the quantity effect dominates and leads to an increase in total revenue. And finally, E says price falls and demand is unit elastic. We know that ED is equal to 1. Any change in price leads to a similar change in quantity. So the two effects cancel out and revenue stays the same. Okay, let's check to make sure all of our final answers are correct. So A says that we'll have a fall in total revenue, and that's met with the previous year's answer as well. B says a fall in total revenue, and B2 also says that. C says increase in total revenue, increase. 4 says increase in total revenue, increase. And 5 says no change, no change. Okay, so we're marked as incorrect just because this solution I don't think will be very helpful to many people, and I think the substitute solution is going to be better. Let's move on to the next question. So the next question says, what are the major features of monopolistic competition compared to pure competition and pure monopoly? Okay. So we went over this a little bit in the first question today, but again, monopolistic competition is somewhere in between pure competition and pure monopoly. It takes on traits of both industries. In pure competition, what you will find, in monopolistic competition, we'll find it just like in pure competition. You'll see a large number of producers, right? And this is different than monopoly, where there's only one producer. So in monopolistic competition, just like in pure competition, we have a large number of producers, but instead of all these producers producing the exact same product, in monopolistic competition, we have slightly differentiated products. So we don't have identical substitutes or perfect substitutes between suppliers. We have close substitutes. And so this leads to a lot more variety for the consumer to choose from, and this is what we call product differentiation. And so, unlike a monopoly, where there's a lot of high barriers to entry and exit, maybe very, very high upfront fixed costs or something like that, in monopolistic competition, just like in pure competition, we find that firms have very low barriers to entry and exit, that firms who want to enter the market can enter with very little barriers, and firms who want to exit the market are not prevented from doing that. And so that's going to be another major feature of monopolistic competition. And finally, the type of competition that monopolistic competitive markets have is sometimes lends itself to what we would describe as non-price competition. So you're no longer trying to win customers off the price, having a better price than your suppliers, but by having some sort of better marketing campaign or some sort of better advertising or some feature that maybe your other competitors don't have. And so a minor feature. And so these are some of the major features of monopolistic competition compared to pure competition and pure monopoly. So I'm going to read the previous tutor's answer. If I recall correctly, it's very, very long, but I'll read all of it just to get all that information out there for you guys, and we can maybe critique some of the things that the previous tutor said. This is a fairly open-ended question, and I think I touched on the major points, but we can see what the more in-depth explanation from this tutor looks like. So, this tutor said, get some water. This tutor said, for monopolistic competition, it's a market structure characterized by a large number of small firms, similar but not identical products sold by all firms, relative freedom of entry and exit out of the industry, and extensive knowledges of price and technology. This is one of four basic market structures. The other three are perfect competition, monopoly, and oligopoly. Monopolistic competition approximates most of the characteristics of perfect competition, but falls short of reaching the ideal benchmark that it is perfect competition. It is the best approximation of perfect competition that the real world offers. That's true. Monopolistic competition is a market structure characterized by a large number of relatively small firms. While the goods produced by the firms in the industry are similar, slight differences often exist. As such, firms operating in monopolistic competition are extremely competitive, but each has a small degree of market control. That's true. In effect, monopolistic competition is something of a hybrid between perfect competition and monopoly. Comparable to perfect competition, monopolistic competition contains a large number of extremely competitive firms. However, comparable to monopoly, each firm has market control and faces a negatively sloped demand curve. The real world is widely populated by monopolistic competition. Perhaps half the economy's total production comes from monopolistically competitive firms. I don't know where that number came from, but maybe that's true. The best examples of monopolistic competition come from retail, including restaurants, clothing stores, and convenience stores. That's true. The four characteristics of monopolistic competition are: number one, a large number of small firms; number two, similar but not identical products; number three, relatively good but not perfect resource mobility; and number four, extensive but not perfect knowledge. For a large number of small firms, a monopolistically competitive industry contains a large number of small firms, each of which is relatively small compared to the overall size of the market. This ensures that all firms are relatively competitive with very little market control over price or quantity. In particular, each firm has hundreds or even thousands of potential competitors. Yeah, so that's different than monopoly, where you have no competition at all. You have a very strong, centralized market control. Number two, similar products. Each firm in a monopolistically competitive market sells a similar but not absolutely identical product. The goods sold by the firms are close substitutes for one another, just not perfect substitutes. Most importantly, each good satisfies the same basic want or need. Goods might have subtle but actual physical differences, or they might only be perceived as different by the buyers, whether the reason buyer treats the goods as similar but not different. Similar but different. That's true. Three, relative resource mobility. Monopolistically competitive firms are relatively free to enter and exit the industry. There might be a few restrictions, but not many of these firms are not perfectly mobile as perfect competition, but they are largely unrestricted by government rules and regulations, startup costs, or other substantial barriers to entry. Four, extensive knowledge in monopolistic competition. Buyers do not know everything, but they have relatively complete information about alternative prices. They also have relatively complete information about product differences, brand names, etc. Each seller also has a relatively complete information about production techniques and the prices charged by their competitors. Product differentiation. The goods produced by firms operating in a monopolistically competitive market are subject to product differentiation. The goods are essentially the same, but they have slight differences. Product differentiation, wow, this is very in-depth, is usually achieved in one of three ways. Number one, fiscal differences. Number two, perceived differences. Number three, support services. Number one, physical differences. In some cases, the product of one firm is physically different from the product of another firm. One good is chocolate, and another is vanilla. One good uses plastic, the other aluminum. Number two, perceived differences. In other cases, goods are only perceived to be different by the buyers, even though no physical differences exist. Such differences are often created by brand names, where the only difference is packaging. Number three, support services. In still other cases, products that are physically identical are perceived to be identical are differentiated by support services. Even though the products purchased are identical, one retail might offer service with a smile, while another provides express checkout. Product differentiation is the main or primary reason that each firm operating in a monopolistic competitive market is able to create a little monopoly all to itself. Alright, what else is going on here? Demand and revenue, demand curve, monopolistic competition, monopolistic competition, demand. The four characteristics of monopolistic competition mean that a monopolistic competitive firm faces a relatively elastic, but not perfectly elastic demand curve, such as the one displayed in the exhibit to the right. I don't think that was actually attached here. Each firm in a monopolistic competitive market can sell a wide range of output within a relatively narrow range of prices. Demand is relatively elastic. Let me see. Demand is relatively elastic in monopolistic competition because each firm faces competition from a large number of very, very close substitutes. This is true. However, demand is not perfectly elastic as it is in perfect competition because the output of each firm is slightly different from that of other firms. Monopolistically competitive goods are close substitutes, but not perfect substitutes. The exhibit to the right. Okay, so I think this is an example given by a graph that we don't have, so we won't go into that. A monopolistically competitive firm is a price maker with some degree of control over price. Once again, unlike perfect competition, a monopolistically competitive firm has the ability to raise or lower the price a little, not much, but a little. And like monopoly, the price received by a monopolistically competitive firm, which is also the firm's average revenue, is greater than its marginal revenue. The analysis of short production by a monopolistically competitive firm provides insight into market supply. A key assumption is that a monopolistically competitive firm, like any other firm, is motivated by profit maximization. The firm chooses to produce a quantity of output that generates the highest possible level of profit, given price, market demand, cost conditions, production technology, etc. In the short run, and this is also talking about a graph that we don't have. In the long run, if all inputs vary, a monopolistically competitive industry reaches equilibrium at an output that generates economies of scale or increasing returns to scale. At this level of output, the negatively sloped demand curve is tangent to a negatively sloped segment of the long-run average cost curve. This is achieved through a two-fold adjustment process. The first of the folds is entry and exit out of firms in and out of the market, or starting an industry. This ensures that firms earn zero economic profit and that price equal to average cost. That's true. The second of the folds is the pursuit of profit maximization by each firm in the industry. This ensures that firms produce a quantity of output that equates marginal revenue with short-run and long-run marginal costs. Because a monopolistic competitive firm has some market control and faces a negatively sloped demand curve, the end result of this long-run adjustment has two equilibrium conditions. One is marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is equal to long-run marginal cost, and two is that price is equal to average revenue, which is equal to average total cost and equal to long-run average cost. With marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, each firm is maximizing profit and has no reason to adjust the quantity of output or factory size. With price equal to average cost, each firm in the industry is earning only a normal profit. Economic profit is zero and there are no economic losses, meaning no firm is inclined to enter or exit the industry. These firm conditions are satisfied separately. However, price is not equal. Because price is not equal to marginal revenue, the two equations are not equal. unlike in perfect competition. This further means that monopolistic competition does not achieve long-run equilibrium at the minimum efficient scale of production. Real-world efficiency. A monopolistically competitive firm generally produces less output and charges a higher price than would be the case for a perfectly competitive industry. In particular, the price charged by a monopolistically competitive firm is greater than its marginal cost. The inequality of price and marginal cost violates the key condition of efficiency. Resources are not being used to generate the highest possible level of satisfaction. The reason for this inefficiency is found with market control. Because a monopolistically competitive firm has control over a small slice of the market, it faces a negatively sloped demand curve, and price is greater than marginal revenue, which is set equal to marginal cost when maximizing profit. While monopolistic competition is technically inefficient, it tends to be less inefficient than other market structures, especially monopoly, even though price is greater than marginal revenue. Because the demand curve is relatively elastic, the difference is often relatively small. This is all true. It talks about market control, and whenever you have market control, you have inefficient outcome. And so then it talks about the other market structures, and we don't have to get into that too much, but basically perfect competition, monopoly, and oligopoly are other three market structures. Great in-depth explanation, nothing wrong there. It's really good for anybody who wants a really good primer on monopolistic competition, and we're going to mark that as correct. And the next question says that the law of diminishing marginal product of labor is demonstrated by which of the following. 1. Total output declines as you increase the quantity of labor. 2. Total output increases only when you increase both labor and ovens. And 3. Total output increases at a decreasing rate as you increase the quantity of labor. And so the law of diminishing marginal product of labor basically tells us that as we add additional units of labor into our supply chain, the additional amount of production that is given by each of those units of labor is going to go down. And so that's what we call the diminishing marginal product of labor. And the answer choice that best encompasses that idea is definitely answer choice 3, that total output increases at a decreasing rate as you increase the quantity of labor. And so that's going to be the correct answer here. We can take a look at the previous year's answer here. The previous tutor says that total output increases at a decreasing rate as you increase the quantity of labor. The law of diminishing marginal product of labor, also known as the law of diminishing marginal returns, states that if a factor input is added in the production process while the quantity of other inputs is kept constant, a point will be reached where subsequent additions beyond will yield decreasing marginal products. So that's not quite the case. The law of diminishing marginal product of labor tells us that from the beginning that labor will yield decreasing marginal product. Not that there is a specific point in time in which that is achieved. Initially, when variable units of any factory input are added to a fixed input, the output increases. Each subsequent addition leads to an increased output as every succeeding marginal return is greater. However, a point is reached where variable inputs are in perfect combination with fixed inputs, and the outcome is optimum. Hence, if we continue to add variable inputs, fixed inputs will be distributed inefficiently to extra inputs, and the marginal product received will be less than the preceding marginal product, resulting in additions will be declining. For example, consider a bakery that has a single oven. Adding one unit of labor in the bakery will create an output where the labor works in combination with the oven. Adding another unit of labor will increase the output as the first labor will distribute its responsibilities to the second. Adding the third unit of labor will increase the output further as one can bake, one can prepare, and the third can pack. However, the fourth unit of labor is added, he or she will not be able to make a significant contribution to the output, as all responsibilities are already taken, so her contribution will be less than the third unit of labor and will experience diminishing marginal returns. Okay, I see what they're saying. So what they're saying is that in the very, very beginning of production, that it's not necessarily true where additional units of labor will yield decreasing marginal returns from the offset, but as soon as you leave the very initial stages of production, the law of diminishing marginal product tells us that every single additional unit of labor yields smaller and smaller returns. And so in the long run, once you have started accounting for additional units of labor, yield lower marginal returns. And so this is a good answer. Nothing wrong with that, and we can mark that as correct. So the next question says that an ambiguous change in price and decrease in quantity are most likely caused by A, no shift in supply and a shift to the left in demand, B, a shift to the left in supply and a shift to the left in demand, C, a shift to the right in supply and a shift to the left in demand, or D, a shift to the left in supply and a shift to the right in demand. And so we can imagine this on a graph. That's a long line. We have a demand curve or supply curve. So we're seeing an ambiguous change in price and a decrease in quantity. So we know immediately, anytime the question says there's an ambiguous change in one of these two, either price or quantity, that both curves need to be shifting, right? So it's not possible for it to be an answer choice like A, where there's no shift in supply, because then there's no ambiguity. There's a settled change in price, right? So what is something? And so we know from this question that a decrease in quantity is caused by both changes, right? So what change in supply would result in a decrease in quantity? And we know it would be a leftward shift, right? A leftward shift in supply would definitely cause there to be a decrease in quantity. And so that will be our first change. And the second change will be what is going to happen in demand that will decrease quantity. And we also know it would be a leftward shift as well. A decrease in demand will also decrease quantity. And so what we're left with is this point here. And we know that both the supply shift and the demand shift contributed to the decrease in quantity that got us to this point, right? So, and then the change in price, well, we know a shift in supply to the left increases prices, right? It goes from here to here. And then we know the change in demand decreases prices. A leftward shift in demand takes price from here to here. And so whether or not price is higher or lower than the initial equilibrium point right here is determined by the relative size of the shifts of supply and demand and the elasticity of this curve. So we don't know. Like in the way we drew it right now, we know that price is going to be higher, but it's possible that if we just redrew the graph with different slopes or different sized shifts, that the equilibrium would be in a different spot. And so there's ambiguity to whether or not price has changed, increased, decreased, or stayed the same. So the correct answer here is going to be a decrease in supply or a shift of supply to the left and a shift of demand to the left as well. And so B is going to be the best answer here. A shift to the left in supply and a shift to the left in demand. Let's take a look at the previous answer. The previous answer said the correct answer is B. When both demand and supply decrease, the equilibrium quantity decreases, but the change in equilibrium price is ambiguous. This means a leftward shift in both supply and demand curves. Great. Okay, so the next question says, a perfectly competitive firm will continue producing in the short run as long as it can cover its A, total cost, B, average total cost, C, average variable cost, or D, average fixed cost. And so let's take a look at the cost curve structure. I don't think this breaks it down enough. We want average variable cost as well in there. So let's find another one. This is good. Okay, so we have our cost curves here. We have marginal cost, average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. And so the question is, in the short run, what does a perfectly competitive firm care about? And so, we know that if if it's producing at a price above average total cost and its marginal revenue is above average total cost, then it's definitely making a profit. So is that the only time that a firm will produce in the short run? And the answer is no. So in the short run, we say that as long as this perfectly competitive firm is producing at a point where price and marginal revenue is greater than average variable cost, then it will continue to produce. And the reason for that is because in the short run, you have fixed costs. And so fixed costs are going to be incurred no matter what. And so if you can produce at a price above average variable cost, that means that every single unit that you're producing is on average earning you positive revenue, right? Even though it might not offset all of the fixed costs, right? Because that would mean you would be above average total cost, which means you would definitely stay in the market. You might be in this area in between average variable cost. Maybe in this area in between average variable cost and average total cost, right? Where you're earning positive revenue on the units that you produce, but you're not being able to cover all of your fixed costs. And that's okay, because if you chose to stop producing when you're in this little area between average variable cost and average total cost, you'd actually lose even more money because you have to pay the fixed costs no matter what. The fixed costs are always going to be there. And so you'd be better off incurring less losses by producing to a certain extent in the short run. Now, in the long run, we don't have fixed costs. We say that all fixed costs are variable, and so in that sense, you would want to make sure you're producing above average total cost. Okay, so the correct answer here is going to be producing as long as you can cover its average variable cost. Let's take a look at the producer's answer. They said total cost, so that's going to be wrong. The correct answer is C. In the short run, firms care about covering their variable costs because this means they're earning positive returns on each unit they produce. If the marginal revenue were to be less than average variable cost, then each unit would actually make negative losses even worse. The firm doesn't care about producing more than ATC in the short run because it's better off continuing to produce goods even if MR is less than ATC, as long as MR is greater than ATC. Okay, number 2. A perfectly competitive firm will earn a profit and will continue producing the profit maximizing quantity of output in the short run if price is which one of the following. So we have 2 criteria here. First, we understand this is in the short run. And second, we understand that we want a firm that will earn a profit and continue producing the profit maximizing quantity of output in the short run. And so what that means is that we can take a look at the answer choices. A says greater than marginal cost. And so this is not going to be the correct answer here. It's possible that if you produce with greater marginal cost that you would earn a profit, right? You're earning profit on each unit for sure. But it's not the question also says we'll continue producing the profit maximizing quantity of output. And so profit maximization occurs when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And so if we assume that you would continue producing the profit maximizing quantity of output, that means you are already at a profit maximizing quantity of output. So you cannot have a marginal revenue or price greater than marginal cost. That price would have to be equal to marginal cost. B says that it's less than marginal cost. And so again, we don't buy that answer, right? If for this one, you still, price is going to be equal to marginal cost. And second, if you had priced less than marginal cost, you're actually earning, you're losing money on each unit of production. And so that's not going to be the case for this question. C says less than average variable cost. And again, we know that if P is less than average variable cost, you're losing money on average, and you'd be better off shutting down. And so C is definitely not going to be one of those scenarios that fits this context where you're earning a profit and you want to continue profit maximization. And finally, you have D, greater than average total cost. And this is going to be the correct answer. You're earning a profit if your price is greater than average total cost. You're able to cover all of the costs of your production, right? Fixed costs and variable costs, and still have some left over because you have price greater than ATC. And also, you could be producing a profit maximizing quantity of output if your marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. And so D is going to be the correct answer here. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer, and they said D as well. Great. Let's take a look at 3. Monopolistic competition is an industry characterized by A product with many close substitutes, B, a horizontal demand curve, C, a small number of firms, or D, barriers to entry and exit. And so we talked about this a lot in earlier questions, but we know the best answer here is going to be a product with many close substitutes, right? A horizontal demand curve is not going to occur in monopoly competition, right? In perfect competition, you have horizontal demand curves because every single firm is a price taker. Whereas in monopolistic competition, you have a slight ability of producers to control price. There's a little bit of market control because your product is slightly differentiated. So it's going to be a more inelastic demand curve than horizontal, but it's still going to be roughly elastic. So B is not going to be correct. C is a small number of firms, but in monopolistic competition, we still assume a large number of firms that make the market competitive. And D, barriers to entry and exit, we assume that in a monopolistically competitive firm that there are no barriers to entry or exit, or very low barriers to entry and exit. So A is going to be the best answer here, a product with many close substitutes. Not identical, but close. So let's take a look at the previous year's answer. Previous year said 3A as well. Yep, that's great. Okay, 4. If a perfectly competitive firm increases production from 10 to 11 units and the market price is $20 per unit, total revenue for 10 units is which one of the following? So the market price in a perfect competitive firm, we have price is equal to marginal revenue. And so if the price is $20 per unit, then marginal revenue is also going to be $20 per unit, and that's flat for every single good. If you're already producing if you want total revenue for 10 units, its total revenue is equal to price times quantity. So it's 10 times $20 per unit, so $200 overall in total revenue. So C is going to be the best answer here. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer, and they said total revenue is equal to 20 times 10 is 200, C as well. That's good. 5 says, the demand curve facing a monopolist is A, horizontal, the same as that facing a perfectly competitive firm, B, downward sloping, the same as that facing a perfectly competitive firm, C, upward sloping, the same as that facing a perfectly competitive firm, D, downward sloping, unlike the horizontal demand curve facing a perfectly competitive firm. And so all of these answer choices compare to a perfectly competitive firm. So what kind of demand curve does a perfectly competitive firm face? And the answer is a horizontal demand curve. We know that perfect competition means that all firms are price takers. There's no price setting. And so they have no market control. You have a perfectly elastic demand curve. And so B and C can't be right because it seems to imply that perfect competition has either a downward or upward sloping demand, where in fact it's horizontal. And the next question is it A or D? And so the difference is A says that the demand curve for a monopolist is also horizontal, whereas D says that the demand curve for a monopolist is downward sloping. And we know that for a monopolist, unlike a perfectly competitive firm, a monopolist has market power, so they are price setters. They can have different prices, and they have the ability to vary those prices. And so we know that the demand curve for a monopolist is going to be downward sloping, and so D is going to be a correct answer here. That the demand curve facing a monopolist is downward sloping, unlike the horizontal demand curve facing a perfectly competitive firm. Let's take a look at the previous year's answer. And they said B, downward sloping, the same as a perfectly competitive firm. And they say that the demand is downward sloping in both cases. The demand curve will seem infinite. The competitive firm can undercut their competitors and absent above industry structure, but the whole market has a downward sloping demand line. However, the previous two is confusing the overall market for the firm's graph. The firm, we know, faces a perfectly competitive, horizontal, perfectly elastic demand curve, whereas the whole market faces a downward sloping curve. And so we're comparing this to the firm level, which means it is in fact going to be D. So 2 says D. In the short, while a perfectly competitive market has a downward sloping demand, the perfectly competitive firm has a perfectly elastic demand. Therefore, since the question specifies the firm level, D is correct. All right, that's not 2, that's question 5, I believe, or 6? 5, great. Next question, C. Suppose that a monopolist increases production from 10 to 11 units. If the market price declines from $30 to $29 per unit, marginal revenue for the 11th unit is which one of the following? So this goes to the core structure of the monopolist market, where you have a demand curve, but marginal revenue is separate from demand curve. That every single dollar decrease in price not only decreases the revenue you receive from the most recent unit, but also the amount of money you receive from all additional units as well. And so you have a steeper marginal revenue than than demand. So let's take a look at this one. So for the 11th unit, the marginal revenue selling that 11th unit is going to be the price of that unit. And the price is $29 per unit. So marginal revenue for the 11th unit is $29. But we also know that the decline in price from 30 to 29, that $1 decline is felt by every single preceding unit as well. So if you used to sell every unit from the first 10 units used to be sold for $30, now you're selling 11 units for $29, then we know that the 10 units all suffer a $1 decrease in marginal revenue as well. So it will be 29 minus 10, or $19 as the marginal revenue for the 11th unit. Another way to calculate this is if we wanted to just sum up the total revenue at 10 units and the total revenue at 11 units. At 10 units, we know that we sold 10 units at $30 each. We had total revenue of $300. And the next, at 11 units, we sell each unit at $29, which gives us 29 times 11, or $319. So at 10 units, we sold $300 of revenue. In 11 units, we got 319 units of revenue. So the marginal revenue of that 11th unit is given by $19. So C is the correct answer here. Let's take a look at the previous answer. The previous answer also said C. Marginal revenue is extra revenue due to production of one additional unit. 29 times 11 minus 30 times 10. 319 minus 300 equals 19. Great. 7 says most electric and gas and water companies are examples of which of the following? A, unregulated monopolies, B, natural monopolies, C, restricted input monopolies, or D, sunk cost monopolies. So the correct answer here is B, natural monopolies, not because these are natural resources, but because these utility markets, the way they're set up, they are naturally, their natural structure is going to be similar to a monopoly market. When you think of electricity, requires a huge fixed cost investment in electric lines, in power grid, and stuff like that in order to deliver electricity to people's homes. And that's something that not all firms can do. Only firms with a lot of capital can do that. And so that market structure naturally lends itself to having only one or two, basically only one firm in the area. And again, it doesn't make sense for there to be multiple providers of electricity. We don't need to have 3 electric lines from 3 different companies connecting to every single house. You only need one. So if one company has already set up an electric grid in an area, there's really no incentive for another company to come and try and set up another electric grid right on top of that area. And so that's what we mean by natural monopoly. So let's take a look at the previous year's answer, and we said 7 as well, or B as well. And finally, 8. If a perfectly competitive firm is producing a quantity that generates P greater than marginal cost, then profit A is maximized, B can be increased by increasing the price, C can be increased by decreasing the price, or D can be increased by increasing production. So for this firm, then, what we know is that if profit if price is greater than marginal cost, then that means that each additional unit that we sell from this point forward is going to give us positive revenue, right? We're earning greater price than the cost of producing those goods, right? So if we increase production, we would continue earning those revenue. And again, remember that the perfectly competitive firm faces a profit maximization rule of price is equal to marginal cost. And so that's when we stop producing. And so if price is still greater than marginal cost, we continue producing until that changes. So D is going to be the correct answer here. Profit can be increased by increasing production. And so you can see that the previous tutor is going to say D as well. This is because it's going to increase marginal cost. It is a price taker and it cannot change the market price. Okay, so we're reviewing our answers now. 1 and 5 got different answers, so we're going to mark this as incorrect, and the other ones we agree on. Okay, let's take a look at the next question. The next question says, during a recession, if the government uses expansionary fiscal policy to increase GDP, then which one of the following happens? Aggregate supply curve will shift to the right, aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, aggregate demand curve will shift to the left, aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. So the first question is, does expansionary fiscal policy affect the supply curve or demand curve? And the answer is it affects the demand curve. We know that when we talk about expansionary fiscal policy, we talk about one of two things, basically. We talk about one being increased government spending. If the government spends more, then that's money that gets injected into the economy. It goes into the hands of the private sector, and then the multiplier effect takes that money and amplifies the effect of spending. So overall spending is going up, and that's shifting the demand curve to the right. For the other method that could also be categorized as fiscal policy, you have tax changes. So if you decrease taxes, then the amount of money that is in the hands of the consumers goes up, and so there's more consumption activity and more investment activity, and that will drive up GDP as well. That will drive up demand as well, which will increase GDP. So we know we're doing the aggregate demand curve. It's either going to be this third answer choice or this fourth answer choice. And finally, is it shifting to the left or to the right? Well, that's given by the term expansionary. Expansionary means that there's currently a contractionary gap, and we want there to be a shift in the demand curve to the right to close that gap. And so D is going to be the right answer here. Aggregate demand curve will shift to the right. So let's take a look at the previous answer. The previous answer says, during a recession, if the government uses expansionary fiscal policy to increase GDP, the AD curve will shift to the right. The correct answer is option D. Expansionary fiscal policy is a type of tax cut which works upon increasing the supply of money. Great. Let's take a look at question 2. Blank is a completely inadequate mechanism, blank, in a modern advanced economy. So currency is a completely inadequate mechanism for providing a medium of exchange in a modern advanced economy. We know that's not true. We know that currency serves a fundamental role as a medium of exchange even today, and that's why it's important. And so 1 is not going to be the right answer here. 2, money is a completely inadequate mechanism for providing a store of value in a modern advanced economy. And again, we know that's not true. We know that money provides an essential service as a store of value, and therefore is important even today in a modern economy for savers all around the world. So that's not going to be right either. C, barter is a completely inadequate mechanism for trying to coordinate trades in a modern advanced economy. Now this is going to be true, right? Barter is when you don't use currency, you trade one item for another item. That's going to be really hard when you want to coordinate very large scale trades today, where we're used to using money, and money provides much more flexibility and adaptability to different types of trades that are being done. And so C is most likely going to be the right answer. We'll take a look at D just to be sure. Money is a completely inadequate mechanism to use as a unit of account in a modern advanced economy. And again, we know that's definitely not going to be true. Money is important as a unit of account, is necessary in today's economy, and so C is going to be the correct answer here. Barter is a completely inadequate mechanism for trying to coordinate trades in a modern advanced economy. So let's take a look at the previous answers. Tutor's answer. Barter, so they choose that as well. The correct answer is option C. It's a system of trade where goods and services are exchanged without using a medium of exchange. It is a money exchange method where currency exchange is unstable. Good. Good answers. All right, the next question says that the production possibilities curve illustrates the basic principle that 1. Production of more of any one good will in time require smaller and smaller sacrifices of other goods. 2. An economy will automatically seek the level of output at which all of its resources are employed. 3. An economy's capacity to produce increases in proportion to its population size. 4. If all the resources of an economy are in use, more of one good can be produced only if less of another good is produced. And so production possibilities curve is given by this graph right here. Okay, let's try it one more time, okay? So we have our 2 goods, we have good X, and we have good Y, and this is the production possibilities curve. So we see this outward bowed shape that's given by something that we call the law of increasing opportunity costs, and what it means is that as we continue to produce more and more of one good, it requires us to give up more and more of another good. And so this is what option 1 is talking about, and is why option 1 is wrong, right? The option 1 says the production of more of any one good one time requires smaller and smaller sacrifices of other goods is the exact opposite of what the law of increasing opportunity costs tells us. It tells us that the production of more of any one good will in time require greater and greater sacrifices of other goods. Okay, so that's not 1. 2 says an economy will automatically seek the level of output at which all its resources are employed. And that's not what the PPS says. There's definitely a possibility at the production possibilities frontier where you don't produce on the frontier, but you produce inside the frontier, and it's something that's feasible but not efficient. So it's not proven that economies will naturally seek out or equilibrate at full resource employment, at least not in the PPF. It's not going to be 2. 3 says an economy's capacity to produce increases in proportion to its population size, and so this is something we know that if population size increased, that the PPF would likely expand, but it's not clear exactly what if the economic expansion is proportional to population size. And this is also not one of the basic principles illustrated by the production possibilities curve. The basic principles is this idea of trade-offs, and so 3 is not going to be the best answer either. And finally, 4, if all the resources of an economy are in use, more of one good can be produced only if less of another good is produced. And so, in that sense, what we're dealing with is that's the correct answer. If we're at full capacity, if we produce more of one good, we know that there's this trade-off. If we produce more of good Y, then you have to produce less of good X. We know there's this trade-off. If we produce more of good X, there has to be less of good Y. And so 4 is going to be the best answer here. And we can take a look at the previous tutor's answer. The previous tutor also said 4, and he said a PPF is a locus of all optimal combination of 2 goods or 2 baskets of goods an economy can produce when all its resources are fully and efficiently utilized given all technology. The shape and slope of a PPF are determined by the fundamental economic principle of scarcity. As resources that are capable of producing goods and services are scarce in nature, we are not allowed to produce goods and services we want in an indefinite manner. As a result, we are required to choose what to produce among various options when resources are limited. An economy uses its resources to produce different goods and services until a full employment level is reached. At full employment level, more of one good can only be produced if less of another good is produced, such that resources involved there can be diverted to the reduction of the former. Great, good answer. So nothing is correct there, and we can mark that as correct. The next question says, which statement accurately describes a country's currency? Select all that apply. 1, the currency is easily divisible. 2, the currency can be used in any other country. 3, the currency has a value that can change. 4, the currency has denominations. And 5, the currency has a value that must stay the same. So we know currency and money share 3 main purposes. Number 1, serve as a unit of account, and what that means is that it allows us to put a quantitative measure on what we think the value of certain items are. Number 2, it serves as a medium of exchange. It's something that people commonly recognize to hold value and therefore can be used in place of barter when purchasing goods and services. And number 3, a store of value, that over time that this currency holds similar value over the long run. and that you'll be able to save money, unlike the way you would have been able to save goods. For example, perishable goods like food, you would not be able to save food and say, I want to save this and store this as my savings because next year it'll probably be rotten. And so, in that sense, currency has that store of value. It doesn't deteriorate over time. Let's take a look and apply those concepts to the answer choices here. So A says the currency is easily divisible. And so that's important, and it doesn't seem to directly express the sentiment behind any of our three purposes, but actually an easily divisible currency is necessary if we want this currency to be a medium of a medium of exchange, right? If the currency is not easily divisible, then it's almost impossible for it to be easily used in transactions. If there's only one giant, like let's say we eliminated all denominations of currency, we said the only bill that you're allowed to use is $100 bills, and that's the smallest unit of currency, then there are a lot of transactions that cannot occur. You wouldn't be able to buy a jar of milk because the least amount of money that you can pay is $100. And so that's not going to be an adequate reflection of value. So a currency that is easily divisible is necessary if you want to have a medium of exchange. B, the currency can be used in any other country, and that's not necessarily true. As long as the currency can be used in your country and recognizes all three values, then it's still a currency. It doesn't necessarily have to be used in other countries. C says that the currency has a value that can change, and so this is true in real life, right? We know that inflation, the change in prices, a relative increase in prices or a decrease in prices, is going to have an effect on the value of currency. And so this doesn't violate our understanding of what a store of value refers to. That's still maintained. The currency value fluctuation is simply a natural occurrence in the real world when we have currency. And so that's going to be a correct answer as well. So A and C. D says that currency has denominations, and again, that's important. We want to make sure, and it goes hand in hand with option A. We want to make sure that a currency, if it's going to function as a medium of exchange, then there needs to be denominations which make that exchange easy and feasible. And so D is going to be the correct answer as well. And finally, E, the currency has a value that must stay the same. And again, we know that's not the case. C says in the real world that the value of currency can fluctuate based on inflation and deflation, but so that it's not necessarily staying the same, but as long as it has generally the ability to store value, that currency fulfills that store value function. So A, C, and D are the correct answers here. So let's take a look at the previous two's answer. So the previous two says that in economics, money is anything which is generally accepted as a medium of exchange. The currency is the type of money which is used to exchange for goods and services, generally issued by the government of the country in the form of paper. As we know that the money is easily divisible, and the currency is the type of money so it's also easily divisible. Value of money changes with the change in time. Similarly, the value of currency also changes with time. The value of individual currency is known as denomination, which means the currency has denomination. So we can say the options A, C, and D are the correct options. Don't forget that money also serves as a unit of account and a store of value. But yes, this answer is correct. We can move on to the next question. Next question says, if the actual price were below the equilibrium market in the market for if the actual price were below the equilibrium price in the market for bread, then A, a surplus would develop and would get worse. B, a shortage would develop, market forces would correct the problem. C, a surplus would develop, market forces would correct the problem. Or D, a surplus would develop and market forces would make it work. So there's no binding price floors or price ceilings here. So what we're dealing with is simply a situation like this. We have our demand curve, our supply curve, we have equilibrium price here, and we have actual price below equilibrium, which is right here. So what's going on here? So we have high quantity demanded, and we have low quantity supplied. What do we call that? A situation in which a lot of people want something and only a little bit of it is being supplied. That's what we call a shortage. So A and C are eliminated. A, C, and D are eliminated. All of these answers talk about a surplus, but in fact, we're dealing with a shortage. B is the only answer left. And to clarify the second part, market forces would tend to correct the problem. What we would see here is that in this case, at this price level, because there's no pricing, this is just where the market is,
suppliers would see that there's so many people who want this good that some of them would be willing to pay more money than the current price in order to get one of these goods. And so they would start charging a little bit of a higher price, and we see that the shortage would decrease a little bit more. And then these people, there's still a shortage, so we'll see the suppliers decrease price again, and then decrease price again until there's no shortage left. And that's where the equilibrium price is reached. And so that's what we mean by market forces are going to tend to correct the problem. Okay, let's take a look at the previous answer. And the previous answer says that the correct answer is B. Market equilibrium observes that if a shortage exists, prices rise in order to entice additional supply and reduce quantity demand until the shortage is eliminated, thus the market self-corrects. Great. Oh, I forgot to say good, but that's the correct answer. The next question says, if the price of tangerines increases, then the price of oranges also rises because A. Consumers consider two good substitutes and demand for oranges increases. B. Consumers consider two goods complements, and so sellers decrease the supply of oranges. C. If the supply of tangerines decreases, then the supply of oranges also must decrease. Or D. Buyers must have expected a higher price for oranges and thus increase their demand for oranges. So what we're dealing with here is clearly two correlated goods. Tangerines and oranges are either substitutes or complements. And so the price of tangerines increases. What does that mean for the quantity demanded of tangerines? Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, so we know the quantity demanded for tangerines goes down. So if we let's take for a second assumption that tangerines and oranges, because we think they are going to be substitutes. If quantity demand for tangerines goes down, that doesn't mean people stop buying, citrus fruit. And so people will look to other citrus fruit like oranges in order to get their citrus fix, right? And so the decline in demand for tangerines is met by an increase in demand in the market for oranges, and that looks something like this. We shift to the right in demand, and lo and behold, what we have is a new equilibrium point with an increase in price. And so this fits our understanding of the context of the problem. The price of tangerines increases, the quantity demand for tangerines goes down, which shifts the demand for oranges up, which increases the price. And so this is because consumers consider two good substitutes, and the demand for oranges increases. And that's what answer A says. So that's going to be the correct answer. Let's take a look at the previous tutor's answer. Previous tutor also said A, and said both oranges and tangerines are substitute goods that complete each other's demands because they can be used in place of the other. One another. A substitute good is one that can be used as a replacement for another good which is either unavailable or the price of that good has increased in the market. With an increase or decrease in the price of a good, the demand for its substitute good increases or decreases. Thus, the elasticity of substitutes is positive. So I think what they mean is that tutor meant that the cross price elasticity of substitute elasticity is positive. But this is the correct answer. The next question says, a blank policy is employed when the government chooses to run a larger deficit. 1 says contractionary, 2 says proportional, 3 says monetary, and 4 says expansionary. Which one of these is going to be the correct answer? And so the correct answer here is going to be expansionary. And so an expansionary policy leads to a larger deficit in two ways. The first is that expansionary policy, if we were to increase government spending, first let's define deficit. A deficit is given when total expenditure is greater than total spending, right? That's government's total budget. And so when you spend more than you have, you run a deficit. So expenditure going up will also contribute to a deficit, and we know that when you employ expansionary policy, the government is going to increase spending likely, and that increase in spending means increasing government expenditure, and that causes a larger deficit. And a second way that expansionary policy might lead to a larger deficit is the other type of fiscal policy, which is a decrease in tax revenue. If there's a decrease in tax revenue from lower taxes, you're stimulating the market by letting consumers spend more, but you also decrease the amount of money that the government is taking in as tax revenue, and that is also going to drive up the deficit because the inflow of cash to the government has gone down. And so expansionary policy causes both those issues. So the previous tutor said expansionary as well, and they said that when the economy slips into a recession due to rapidly decreasing aggregate demand, the government adopts expansionary measures to incentivize consumption such that the profitability of markets can be restored. Expansionary fiscal policy includes tax cuts to increase the personal disposable income of consumers, to enhance the level of aggregate demand and or increasing the level of government spending. An increase in the level of government spending increases the demand for labor by increasing investment in the market. As employment increases, aggregate demand is pushed rightward due to improvements in the spending capacity of consumers. An economy's budget balance is the difference between government tax revenue receipts generated from tax or other public sources of income and total expenditure made. Hence, if the government decides to go with expansionary policy, it chooses to run a large deficit that is likely to result from decreased taxes and increased expenditure. So that's good. Okay. Next question says, which of the following is true under a monopoly? A, monopolists choose the highest possible price. B, monopolists choose a price that is always higher than the marginal cost of production. C, marginal revenue of monopolists is price. And D, none of the above are true for monopoly. Let's take a look at the monopoly graph. Okay, so let's take this graph for monopoly. So the difference between monopoly and other types of, that's not the right graph. The difference between monopoly and other types of goods is because there's this distinct marginal revenue curve that's separate from the demand curve. And so we know profit maximization still occurs for monopolies at where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. So marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost right here. But because the marginal revenue curve and demand curve are different and monopolies are price setters, the price they set isn't here, it's up here. And so at price PM, that's where the monopoly sets. And so we know that this is not the highest possible price. The highest possible price would be over here, but that's not profit maximization. PM is profit maximization. And so it's not the highest possible price. B says monopolists choose a price that is always higher than marginal cost. That is true, right? Because if we say that you find the intersection of marginal cost and marginal revenue, and then you look at where that quantity demands a price on the demand curve, then the price you get will always be higher than marginal cost. So B is the correct answer. C says marginal revenue monopolist is price. And again, the marginal revenue of monopolists is not always price. The price is PM, but marginal revenue is lower. And so that's not going to be true. So B is the correct answer here. And the previous tutor also said B. Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. P is greater than marginal revenue for a monopolist. P is equal to marginal revenue in perfect competition. Next, you have a manager of monopoly that faces demand curve described by P is equal to 230 minus 20Q. Your costs are C equals 50 plus 30Q. And the profit maximizing output for your firm is which of the following? 4, 5, 6, or 7. Okay. So a little bit of calculus here. So profit maximization is given by the point in which the difference between total revenue and total cost, total revenue minus total cost is going to be the greatest, right? And so we're given this question, we know that total revenue is given by P times Q, so total revenue is given by 230Q minus 20Q squared. I think the previous tutor wrote this out, so we're just going to go if that'll work. Yeah, okay, so total revenue is given by 230Q minus 20Q squared, and profit is maximized when revenue minus cost is greatest, and cost is given by the cost curve, 5 plus 30Q. And so we subtract that from the total revenue curve, and you get negative 20Q squared plus 200Q minus 5. And we want to see where is this difference, which is the profit equation, where is this quadratic maximized? So we take a derivative, and you would get something like negative 40Q plus 200, and you would get Q is equal to 5, right? If we did 200 divided by 40, you would get 5. And so at Q equals 5, profit is maximized, and so the correct answer is B. So that's going to be correct. All work there was done correctly. Hopefully that equation and setup made sense. Number 3 says, which of the following is true?
Number one, A monopolist produces on the inelastic portion of its demand. B, a monopolist always earns an economic profit. C, the more inelastic the demand, the closer marginal revenue is the price. Or D, in the short run, a monopoly will shut down if P is less than ABC. So, a monopolist produces on the inelastic portion of its demand. We see that the inelastic portion of demand is anything less than the equilibrium point, which would be marginal cost is equal to demand at C. So anything to the left is on the inelastic portion of demand, and you will always, always, always have monopolists produce there. So A is going to be correct and true. Sorry, A is going to be false. It's not always going to be. Sorry, I misspoke. The inelastic portion of demand is going to be on the lower half, so it's not always going to be true that a monopolist produces on an inelastic portion. You can also have a situation in which a monopolist is regulated and therefore produces at a different point. B says a monopolist always earns an economic profit, and so this is not always the case. If the average cost is higher here, right? Average costs were to be over here instead of down here, then you would find no profit. You find the monopolist would actually exit this market because it's making negative profit. So that's not always true. C says that the more inelastic demand, the closer marginal revenue is to price, and so we see that if we put those factors in together, that's not necessarily true. Marginal revenue is independent from demand, and so a more elastic demand will have two curves that are more close together. And finally, D, in a short run, a monopoly will shut down if P is less than the average variable cost. And this is true. If you have to produce at a point in which a monopoly is losing money for every unit of output at average variable cost, then that's definitely going to cause them to exit the market. So D is going to be the correct answer here. And so we can take a look at the previous answer given by the tutor. In a short run, a monopoly will shut down if P is less than ABC, and so revenue must be greater than variable cost for a firm to continue its operation. That's true. 4. In a competitive industry with identical firms, long-run equilibrium is characterized by which of the following? In a competitive industry, P is equal to average cost, P is equal to marginal cost, C is equal to marginal revenue. C says marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, or D, all of the above. And so over here, long-run equilibrium, you're going to find all of these things are going to be the same. That price is equal to marginal revenue, okay? Marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, okay? In the long run, that you find that it's going to intersect the average cost at a tangent point. And so in the long run, all of those things are going to be the same. So D is going to be correct, all of the above. Great. 5, you are the manager of a firm that sells its product in a competitive firm at a price of $50. Your firm's cost function is C is equal to 40 plus 5Q squared. Your firm's maximum profits are which of the following? So we do the same process that we did before. If we're selling a product at $50 in a competitive market, then the total revenue is 50Q, right? Your firm's cost function is 40 plus 5Q squared. So your profit function is 5Q squared minus 50Q plus 40. Or if we want to simplify that, it would be Q squared minus 10Q plus 4. And so that's going to be our derivative, and then we can take a derivative of that and substitute the value of Q into the profit function, and we would get 85 for the correct answer here, and that would be the correct answer for firm's maximum profits. Great. And so a perfectly competitive firm faces A, a perfectly elastic demand function, B, a perfectly inelastic demand function, C, a demand function with unitary elasticity, or D, none of the above. In perfect elasticity, a perfect competitive firm, we know means that all firms are price takers. Therefore, we have a perfectly horizontal demand curve, and that's what we call perfectly elastic demand function. And so A is going to be the correct answer here. So A, a perfectly elastic demand function, and that can be proven by this calculus here. So all these correct answers are correct. Good answers, and we can mark them all as correct, and we'll wrap that up. So I believe, yep, that's the last question for today. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys going over those questions. And other than that, I'll see you guys on Thursday.